This is part 1 of a 2-part Anthem review. This video will focus on Anthem's campaign, story, mission design, core gameplay, early loot game, and technical state. The second video, which will cover Anthem's endgame rhythm, high difficulty scaling, class design, and build diversity systems, will come in a few weeks' time after I've had the chance to fully explore these. This video will contain minor spoilers to highlight examples, but none of that should undermine your appreciation for Anthem's main story elements. Do note that I do show footage of the last boss. In 1998, Bioware released Baldur's Gate, a game that took the pen and paper RPG that people had been playing for decades and put it into people's computers, practically inventing the CRPG genre overnight. The sequel, Baldur's Gate 2, released in 2000, went on to become the most acclaimed CRPG of all time, eclipsed only recently by Divinity Original Sin 2. It took 18 years to make a game as good as Baldur's Gate 2. In 2003, Bioware released what many people would consider the greatest Star Wars game ever made. Knights of the Old Republic combined some incredible writing and characterization with some competent and accessible RPG systems to deliver one of the best Star Wars adventures outside the movies. In my view, and in the view of many others, 16 years later, there still has never been a better Star Wars game made. In 2007, Bioware, who clearly understood the magic at the heart of the Star Wars DNA, released their own space opera, Mass Effect. A sprawling multi-galactic saga of warring species, political intrigue, romance, and mystery. A tale of diabolical peril on an unfathomable scale, tempered by perfect, quiet moments of loyalty and friendship. The Mass Effect trilogy ended poorly, but despite this, its light is undimmed, and since then, I think only The Witcher 3 has equaled it in scale and its storytelling brilliance. 12 years on, the original Mass Effect trilogy still stands tall in the pantheon of gaming's greatest achievements. In 2017, Bioware released the much anticipated sequel to the Mass Effect series, Mass Effect Andromeda. It was a disappointment. It was not a bad game, but it was a bad Mass Effect game, and following on from the bitterness of the Mass Effect 3 ending, fans wondered if the Bioware they knew and loved was still there, or if the passage of time had seen too much changing of the guard, or too many new priorities emerge. As the reality of Mass Effect Andromeda had set in, many people had pushed a narrative that it was the B team to blame. Developed by Bioware in Montreal instead of Bioware Edmonton, the argument went that this wasn't the real Bioware that had made all of these masterpieces, it was a satellite office who held the name but not the magic. Bioware didn't tell us this story, EA didn't tell us this story. People told themselves that story in order to maintain the hope that the Bioware that had given us so many great games was still there. They were simply working on Anthem, and when it arrived, we'd see that Bioware was alive and well and that all our fears would be allayed. Now, having played through the campaign of Anthem, I can confidently say that the story that many people told themselves was just that. It was just a story. It had no basis in fact whatsoever, because Anthem, made by Bioware's A-team, is a colossal disappointment. Every single problem that plagued Andromeda is far, far worse here in Anthem. In fact, Anthem introduces a host of new problems owing to its choice of genre and the limited and uninspired way it chose to mimic the worst aspects of that genre without bringing anything of substance to compensate for this copy and pasted banality. I know this is a live service game, and I know it will be updated with patches and DLC, but you cannot unbake a cake, and what's wrong with Anthem is baked so deep into its crust that whole components of the game's mechanics and engine would need to be ripped out and replaced in order to fix them. I'm talking core components of combat like animation, enemy AI, hit registration, and encounter design. I'm talking about loading screens groaning to reveal unintelligible menus leading to only more loading screens. I'm talking about the fact that there's only one map and every part of it looks the same. I'm talking about the most repetitive feeling campaign I have ever played in a looting game. I'm talking about storytelling that is a gigantic step back for these once proud master storytellers. I'm talking about shooting mechanics that are the worst across the entire spectrum of the looter-shooter genre, and a loot game that is held hostage by the need to monetize the armor your character wears. Anthem is the worst game Bioware has ever put out. The Old Republic was a competent but derivative MMO with an absolutely brilliant story. Anthem is an utterly incompetent looter shooter with an abysmal story. Its lack of vision and narrative is matched only by its horrid technical state. Where Baldur's Gate, KOTOR, and Mass Effect have a shelf life measured in decades, we cannot yet even begin to run the clock on Anthem's shelf life because the game is so far from finished that it simply would not make sense. Almost every looter has launched poorly, but Anthem feels particularly weak as it fails to heed the lessons of all of those failed launches that came before it, or recognize just how competent and entrenched the competition has become over the 6 years that it has been in development. It now enters a highly competitive, arguably saturated market with no redeeming virtues and only the faint hope of future improvements to keep it alive. If 6 years was not enough to get this thing into shape, then what good will 6 weeks or 6 months be? Some people may find out, but the overwhelming majority of people will not be sticking around, myself included. In its current form, Anthem is everything wrong with AAA gaming. Trend chasing, designed by committee, missing core features, monetized, shrewdly marketed, buggy as hell, and pushed out before it was finished. If nothing else, I sincerely hope Anthem serves as a wake-up call for how broken the AAA live service development model has become. If it achieves this and only this, then perhaps Mass Effect did not die in vain. The heart of Bioware games has always been their stories. Gameplay was absolutely incredible in their older games like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights and Dragon Age Origins, but as Bioware moved into the console market, their gameplay systems became far simpler and more accessible. They were still great, they were just a lot more streamlined. Despite this, their stories remained dense, full of imagination, superbly written, particularly Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect. Just fantastic. Since the moment Anthem was announced, Bioware fans have been asking themselves and others, is this really going to be a true Bioware game? Is it going to have the commitment to great storytelling that Bioware is known for? With the exception of Borderlands, the looter shooter genre has always struggled to nail storytelling, and fans wondered if Anthem would suffer the same fate as Destiny or The Division, their bland stories shoved into the background as players were invited to painfully excavate the lore through in-game audio logs or out-of-game grimoire cards. Anthem's story is absolutely better than vanilla Destiny or The Division. There are cutscenes, they have a clear narrative flow, the voice acting is actually superb, there's a clear beginning, middle, and end, it strives for some stakes and some dramatic tension, and it has some characters that work really well. It might be considered a decent enough story in most other games, but for Bioware, this story is just so beneath their legacy. It is a very, very bog-standard tale about a bad guy who wants a thing for generic bad guy reasons and a ragtag group of people trying to stop him. The foundations of the world building here are surprisingly strong. There's a cutscene towards the start of the game which really sets the scene for the battle ahead and mythologizes some heroes. But that cutscene is literally the only good story beat in the entire game. It's all downhill from there. The rest of the game, you're left looking back at that cutscene thinking, why can't I just have more of that? It feels like the lore of the freelancers and the world they inhabit is completely squandered in a story that just crescendos into absolute nothingness. And can I just say, you thought Mass Effect 3's ending was bad? Holy shit. Wait until you get a load of this. I won't spoil it, but yeah, anyway, let's move on. One of the things I found really ingenious about the way that Bioware handled the game's villain, whose name is the Monitor, is that instead of just making him sound angry and crazy, they actually voiced him in the exact same way that Josh Brolin voices Thanos.
No, that's not how we conduct business. I find that pain is no substitute for money. So let's negotiate.
He's quiet, he's deliberate, he's subdued, he exudes confidence and self-assuredness because he doesn't need to bellow to get what he wants. He just quietly takes it. But unlike Thanos, the Monitor has nothing interesting to say at all, and the voice is actually hiding how one-dimensional this guy is. Like, if you take any one of his lines and then voice it over with a traditional bad guy voice, you'd see that there's just nothing there.
Freelancers. I was afraid you weren't coming.
Yeah, but the lack of an audience is just killing it.
Something like that. Let's see if you can meet me at the cenotaph. I know you'll appreciate what I'm about to do.
This guy is not Darth Malik, he's not Saren, he's not Sovereign, he's not the elusive man. He's just a pretender, he's little more than a puffed up shirt, and the Monitor will hold no long-term real estate in anyone's mind except remembering the hilariously bad method of his demise. So that's plot, and I think it's generic, whatever, but there's a much bigger problem with the story, and that's the way that Bioware deliver it, and how divorced this delivery is from the core gameplay, which is absolutely unforgivable, because this is the studio, among all studios ever, who nailed a formula that seamlessly merges story and gameplay. I'll explain. In Mass Effect, when I spoke to Rex about the genophage virus that rendered his people sterile, or the Solarians that engineered it, that conversation wasn't just there as some throwaway anecdote, like a lore entry in a codex, for example. That story that he told me would go on to have gameplay implications, because I'd be out in the field with Rex and we might meet a Solarian and Rex will comment that he doesn't trust this person because they're a Solarian, or I'd do a loyalty mission with Rex and I'd help him discover a cure for the genophage. Hell, I might even have to decide the fate of his entire species as we learn more about the virus, and I get access to new quests and cutscenes and all sorts of stuff based on the decisions that I make. And I really cared about this all the more because when I was out in the field and Rex was standing there next to me, I could feel the significance of all of those conversations. When Rex stood behind me, I knew it was because he had my back. He wasn't just some NPC I ordered around, he was my loyal foot soldier, my brother in arms, my friend. Anthem has dialogue choices like previous Bioware games do, but unlike previous Bioware games, these choices mean absolutely nothing to either the story or the gameplay outcomes. No matter what you choose, the story is always going to be the same, and none of it will influence your gameplay in any way, shape, or form. The Bioware genius that linked story and gameplay is completely shattered here. And the dialogue is just so fucking boring. Like, man, Shepard, you never knew what that guy was gonna do or say or who he was gonna punch.
I gave him an extra dose of his meds after the attack.
Say goodnight, Manuel.
You cannot silence the truth. My voice must be heard.
Oh my god!
It was always so interesting to take part in dialogue in Mass Effect or KOTOR or Dragon Age Origins. Here, it's just so boring as one-dimensional characters bombard you with meaningless anecdotes that you know have no impact on your experience whatsoever.
Because this is gonna... Sentinel Dax is actually...
Everyone in the fort knows that.
Really?
Yes, it's common knowledge.
Oh, well, it's still pretty interesting though, right?
It was the first 50 times I heard it.
Okay, I hear you. But you're still gonna come to me for all your inside information, right?
I never did.
So, nothing's changed with us?
No.
Whew. Good, okay, so... Hey, do you want to go for a bite or something?
No.
I get it. Next time, I swear I'm gonna be a better friend. Don't be mad.
I think some of this might have been less painful if it was delivered in the field during the missions. It could break up some of the monotony of the gameplay when you arrive at an NPC, have a chat with them, maybe make a choice that might affect the direction of the mission, etc. The Old Republic actually did this and it worked quite well. Here in Anthem, instead of being woven into the core mission flow, almost all of the story is delivered back in Fort Tarsus, where you painfully shuffle from one NPC to the next while they spout dull exposition at you, and you occasionally select between two meaningless dialogue options, which I swear to God have been implemented to test whether or not the player has fallen asleep. The fact that there's no in-mission dialogue sequences means that all the expository dialogue has to be packed into the gaps between missions. Like, I would go through every NPC at Fort Tarsus listening to them all speak, and this meant that I would be spending upwards of 20 or 30 minutes between each mission doing fuck all. Every time I loaded into the fort and saw a dozen new yellow icons on my map, I groaned. And can I just say that Fort Tarsus is the absolute worst hub I've ever been in. It is so barren and creepy. It feels like a dead city. It's so quiet that it hurts my ears to be there.
Hey, stop by, right?
But when we get to Anthem, we'll do whatever we like.
When you compare the reality of it to the reveal footage at E3, you cannot be struck by how lifeless it feels. The Citadel from the original Mass Effect game like 12 years ago was way better, way more interesting, way more buzz to it than what we have here. I have no idea how to fix this place, but it absolutely needs a rework. The first person perspective as well, it's weird. The characters all look sort of cross-eyed, and seeing them just stand there looking at you with no change in camera angle for upwards of 5 or 10 minutes, there's a reason they don't shoot movies like this. It just doesn't work there, and it doesn't work here either. So at this point, some of you might be thinking, mate, this isn't a traditional Bioware game. They're trying something different, ease off. That's very fair, that's very true. This is different. This isn't a narrative-led experience, it's a looter-shooter. However, Bioware, in their desire to cater to their existing audience, roped in a number of storytelling elements from their narrative-led games and crudely bolted them onto this one. They don't work here, and the result is two totally separate games. Out there is the mindless looter-shooter, and in the fort is the narratively barren walking simulator. Bioware didn't try to evolve their storytelling format to fit a new genre. They simply made two totally separate, disconnected experiences after spending literally 20 years showing the entire industry how to merge those two things seamlessly. It is a tragic misapplication of their extraordinary talents. Alright, so let's talk about the word repetition. We need to really examine this word and understand it because the entire conversation about this game will pivot on this one word, and I'm already seeing it out there right now. Bungie has famously said that the job of any game is to find a rewarding 30-second gameplay loop and just deliver that over and over again in slightly different ways. At their core, all games are repetitive. Chess, move the pieces. Tetris, drop the blocks. Mario, jump on the thing. Halo, shoot the alien. Bayonetta, kick the demon. God of War, boy the boy. All games have one or two tricks and then they deploy them in different ways. I think the goal of game development is to firstly arrive at a really good 30-second loop, and then secondly, to trick the player into not noticing that they're playing the same 30 seconds over and over again. If you've got a really good 30-second loop, then you don't need to do much tricking. If you've got a PvP game on your hands, then real-life opponents that people are playing against will do that tricking for you. If your 30-second loop is a little weak, perhaps an exceptional story will stop people from noticing. There's an infinite number of ways to do this, but the goal is always the same. Get the player excited about doing the same thing over and over again. Looter shooters, more so than most games, are defined by their repetition. You do the same missions over and over again. You kill the same enemies over and over again. You might have some PvP thrown in there for some of them, but not in others. Either way, they are very much about repetition, so it's critical that these games can nail their 30-second combat loops and do a good job of tricking players into not noticing that repetition. Now, I'm a huge looter fan. I've played pretty much every looter over the last 20 years. I've always enjoyed their campaigns because that's the first time I engaged that 30-second loop, and it feels new and interesting and fun, and also because the first time you play through the campaign missions, they feel new, and developers typically throw in enough surprises in those campaigns to keep things interesting. Anthem is the very first time that I've played through a looter and been bored of it before even finishing the campaign. This is because the 30-second loop just isn't there, and because the campaign is the most repetitive looter shooter campaign since the dark days of vanilla Destiny. We'll talk about the combat in the next section, but let's focus on the campaign for now. The issues start with the world. Now, don't get me wrong, Anthem's world is stunning to look at. Its scale is incredible, the verticality is fantastic, the natural landscapes are really something. It's definitely very, very pretty. But there is one map in Anthem. One. And it all looks the same. Every single mission, every single one, is set in either outdoor ruins or indoor ruins or a cave. I look back over all the footage and I can't even remember which mission is which because all the footage looks exactly the same to me. It would be like if Destiny had launched with just one planet. I mean, the Division had just one city, but within that was a huge range of locations. Anthem just doesn't have that range of locations. Everything looks the same, and I challenge you to go right now and look at other YouTube videos and find footage that looks notably different than the footage you're seeing here. You won't be able to do it. I think a perfect example is here, where some shit goes down in an indoor setting. This is a cutscene, and there are heaps of people around because we're at this sort of party thing, and I'm not in my javelin suit here, mind you. I'm just there, and then this surprise attack happens, and because of how the game handles environments, I sit through a loading screen for a full minute, and then I'm magically in my suit and I'm battling enemies, and there's no trace whatsoever of all the stuff I saw just a moment ago in that cutscene. Not only did this make absolutely no sense, but it was just so immersion shattering. If the game had a better range of indoor and outdoor settings, this would have been avoided because I would have just been able to play in one of those, but because everything needs to take place in this gigantic overworld, we end up with situations like this. As for what you're actually doing during the missions, there's 3 things and 3 things only. Number 1, stand on a point and defend it. Number 2, collect rocks and bring them back to a big rock. Number 3, collect glowing orbs and bring them back to whatever the fuck this is. That's it. There's some puzzles thrown in there that you can get past in like 15 seconds, but the campaign is exactly this over and over again on the one map inside either outdoor or indoor ruins or caves over and over and over again. Now, you could very easily reduce the Division or Warframe or Destiny or Path of Exile or Diablo or Monster Hunter World, any game you want, down to its most basic and repetitive elements and say, well, other games are just as repetitive. Sure. But as I've said, part of the equation is to trick players into not noticing the repetition. Anthem fails to do this more than any other looter I have ever played. Its repetitiveness is immediately apparent to you after about the first 2 or 3 missions because it does not have the window dressing to obscure it. Its structure is presented to you at the very start and it never ever changes throughout your entire campaign or even at the end game for that matter. It's clear that Bioware just don't have the imagination to keep things fresh. Like this mission here where I have to kill this monster thing. Cool, fine, killed him. But then you go into the next room and you now need to kill 2 of those guys at the same time. Okay, fine, done. Then when they die, you literally need to kill the exact same enemy, only this one has like way more health. All 4 enemies were identical but for their hit points, and you kill 4 of them in a row. And that's the mission. There are other examples like this throughout the game. It is not an isolated example. So right now I feel like I've made this point as clearly as I can, but I know there's a lot of people out there that won't accept it and will just say it doesn't make sense to call Anthem repetitive but not Destiny. I get that. It's not possible to objectively prove why this game feels more repetitive than any other looter shooter I've played. I'll just say that I've played 20 years of looter games and I've never experienced something as blatantly repetitive as this. If you don't believe me, then you are certainly more than welcome to try it for yourself. The one time where there is some variation to the mission structure is at about the game's midpoint, where in order to progress the story, you have to unlock 4 tombs hidden in the open world. So when you get to these tombs and when you find them, you learn that you need to complete a bunch of challenges to get them open. And I think, okay, that sounds pretty cool. I like where this is going. This list of things that you need to do isn't presented to you in a clear, easily accessible UI. You instead need to dig through 3 layers of confusing menus to get to them. And I swear to God, most people just won't find this shit and they'll have to keep coming back to the doors. I bet you any money that will happen. Anyway, the shit you have to do: merely kill 50 enemies, complete 5 world events, harvest 15 materials, collect 15 chests, excruciating, boring filler. And when you do finally do all of this bullshit, each of the tombs you open, it's just a fucking room. There's nothing in there at all. No interesting boss or some cool item drop that you're like, yeah, that's awesome. Nothing but a stone slab and a text box. I could not believe it. This quest completely halts any momentum that might have developed for you at this point in the game. It's a solid 2 to 3 hour slog through utter banality. Before this, I was feeling like, yeah, I'm not really enjoying this, I don't know. But after this quest and what it forced me to do and how much of a showcase it was for all of the game's problems, I was like, oh yeah, this definitely sucks. So just as an update to this, we'll pause for a second. I know that during my recording, scripting, etc. of this video, Bioware put out an update and changed this quest. They made it so that the requirements are actually tracked from level 3 onwards, which means that hopefully by the time you get to this quest, you don't need to do this quest anymore. A lot of people are taking that as evidence of, yay, Bioware's listening and this game's gonna be great now. But what they've essentially done is chop about 3 hours worth of content out of their campaign. If you think that's a good thing and that's a sign that this game is in a much better place now, cool. I think it's pretty strong evidence that the game was never in a good place to begin with. Regardless, this quest highlights a lot of the game's issues that have nothing to do with this quest itself, and I'll explain those now. I mean, for example, not only is the quest UI totally confusing, but the map UI is beyond useless. There's no information on this map at all. It's just topography. So if you want to know where you might find a chest, bad luck, you can't. There's nothing there. And world events, these aren't marked on your map either. So you don't know when they're happening. This means that when you do find a world event, you're almost always doing it solo because the map is huge and everyone is just so spread out and they have no idea that an event is happening in another section of the map. It makes the entire world event stuff just horrible because you're doing content that is designed for multiple players all on your own. Now you won't believe this, but in free play, if you're playing solo and you get downed, you cannot res yourself. You have to sit there through a loading screen and then you get teleported to the nearest launch pad, which may be really far away from where you were. And if you don't remember where you died on the map, then you can't get back there. So if there was some world event happening that you needed to finish for this quest and then you died in the middle of it, you just can't get back to that world event because you don't know where it is. Free play is completely balked. It needs a complete user experience overhaul, and this long 2 to 3 hour quest illustrates that absolutely perfectly. Beyond this, I really do not like the way that auto matchmaking affects campaign missions. Firstly, I think playing with a squad of people really sucks here. I'd much rather be playing this campaign with a squad of NPC freelancers, like those I'm conversing with back at Fort Tarsus. That would create a much stronger narrative link between gameplay and story than currently exists. Instead, I match with 3 random people and we can't talk to each other because there's no chat window on PC, there's no ping system so we can't coordinate our attacks or combos. It feels like I'm playing with 3 randomly selected AI bots. Also, the game backfills missing team members, so if you're doing a story mission for the first time, you could be match-made into a mission that's halfway through or basically finished, so you'll just miss that portion of the story entirely. This was perfectly typified here when a streamer named Seagull was completing the last mission of the game and a random level 3 dude joined them. It was just crazy.
Level 3? How does a level 3 join us?
Wait, what?
What?
Hey, does that mean he's on a new Titan or something?
No, Titan level doesn't...
Quick play?
What?
Is it quick play and he's just accidentally spoiling the end of the game for himself? There's no way. There's no way.
No way, dude. You can actually quick play into the final mission of the game as a new player.
No, I don't believe that. Hey, White Pogo, have you ever done the story mission in this game?
You can actually quick play into the last mission.
He said no!
No.
Wait, you've never done it? You need to leave. This is a spoiler. You need to leave right now. This is a spoiler for the end of this game. You need to leave.
Oh, okay.
If you don't encounter these issues, you'll almost certainly find that because the load times are so long, your team gets ahead of you. So you're often teleported from your current position to them with a loading screen thrown in there for good measure. And the warning you get before this literally obscures your jet bar, so you can't see if your jets are about to overheat. So like, you're racing to get there as fast as you can to avoid another fucking loading screen, but you can't see if you're about to crash. My god, what the hell has been going on at Bioware for the last 6 years? I'll make the point that nowhere in the entire campaign do you get a single impressive piece of loot that might pique your interest about the broader loot game. There isn't one drop that makes you go, fuck yeah. Instead, it's all just collecting some new abilities that have slightly better stats and some other stats that don't even make sense yet. I won't speak about the loot stuff in detail here in this review, I'll save that for the next, but I will say that I am very concerned about this aspect of the game, and I worry that the decision to remove armor from the drop pool has made every item feel like a stat stick rather than a satisfying piece of equipment that the looter-shooter genre thrives on. When you do make it through the campaign, after about 15 hours mind you, you'll be at around level 20 or so, and then you'll have to continue to grind the same shit until level 30, at which point the real endgame gear grind begins. But like, why the endgame didn't begin at level 20, I'll never know. I guess they just wanted to pad it out further by giving you 10 useless levels to play with. And at that point, you're now running the 3 strongholds over and over again, doing repeatable daily missions and doing free play for whatever reasons. The strongholds, by the way, are the one you did in the demo, and then there's a new one, and then the last mission of the game is reused as the final stronghold. You literally just run through the last mission over and over again. That's the end game. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about all that now. I want to fully explore the end game properly before I pass judgment on it, but I will say that I am not looking forward to playing that end game, not even a little bit. Let's come back to that core 30-second gameplay loot thing I spoke about earlier. I think most looters have launched with a fairly solid core gameplay loop. Borderlands, Destiny, Diablo, Path of Exile, Monster Hunter, The Division, they've all got combat rhythms that felt really good, even if the games themselves had some broader problems, and yes, many of the games in that list did have a lot of problems, it still felt pretty good to play those games. I think a big part of that successful looter-shooter combat loop is moment-to-moment decision making. So with Destiny, for example, as with Halo before it, I need to look at which enemy I'm facing and consider their movesets and tactics. I need to consider my available resources like ammo and grenades, or my abilities being on cooldown. I need to think about which weapon I should be using, maybe something ranged like a scout rifle, or perhaps something up close and personal like a shotgun. I need to consider things like cover or how exposed I might be at a given time. Hell, I need to consider incoming projectiles since most of the bullets in Destiny aren't hit scanned, so I can actually dodge them if I know what I'm doing. I think that the 30-second loop is about knowing all these things and over time sensing them and being able to make smart, skill-based decisions within that framework. My biggest concern with Anthem's combat at this point is that I don't think it's made up of lots of tiny decisions. I think it's about engaging the most brain-dead and uninteresting enemies I've ever seen in a looter shooter, and using your 2 abilities on cooldown while shooting your woefully ineffective gun over and over again until all the enemies are dead or you are unexpectedly one-shot. I will admit that I found Anthem's gameplay really enjoyable when I played the demo, and I said as much in my preview, but I was expecting that the combat model would evolve over time as I fought new enemies or gained access to new weapons and abilities. That evolution just doesn't happen here, and with the game's missions designed the way that they are, the one-dimensional nature of combat wears thin very quickly. Enemy design and AI is a really big part of the problem. Now, I don't expect looter shooter enemies to be particularly intelligent, but Anthem's enemies are particularly stupid. They just stand there. They don't do anything, like nothing. I mean, at least the Division's enemies will flank you, or Destiny's enemies will teleport around you or take cover or whatever. Anthem's enemies, they just stand there or they just run at you in a straight line. I think the combat has also been designed exclusively with group play in mind, which is fine if you're in missions, but if you're doing solo, free play, whatever, then problems emerge immediately. I do think that the HP gap between the low level enemies and the shielded enemies is too high. I feel like when I go up against a red bar enemy, I can immediately melt them, but anything with a shield is probably going to KO me if I try and 1v1 in without some form of crowd control, like a freeze or something. Enemies do have weak spots to shoot at, but it never feels quite right. Like the shield guys, for example, they have these massive shields and their weak spots are behind them. Again, this is totally fine if you're in a group, but it's really frustrating if you're playing solo. You just can't hit that shit. It just becomes so annoying. Enemies also don't have telegraphs to tell you what they're about to do or where they're about to do it. The way the enemies spawn is also really bad. Like they just appear out of thin air. And I think an important part of like encounter design is saying, all right, this group of enemies will appear from here and that group of enemies will appear from there and then this guy will come up from there, so that a team can sort of plan around that and use their abilities to control the flow of battle. Because enemies in Anthem just sort of materialize out of nowhere, none of that ever happens. You can't ever lock down specific locations with any form of strategy like you can in many, many other shooters. I just think the overall behavior patterns of enemies is not conducive to interesting counterplay. With a wizard in Destiny, I know that I need to pop their shields and burn them down in that time because they will dive for cover, because that's what they're programmed to do. In Anthem, enemies don't have interesting AI quirks for you to learn and master. They just either stand there or they run straight towards you. Much of this is exacerbated by the fact that most enemy damage is hit scan, meaning that they aren't projectiles that you can see and dodge. There are definitely some of those, but there's also a lot that isn't that. So very often you'll just find yourself at low health, wondering what the hell is shooting at you and what's damaged you. These instant sources of damage are everywhere and they are so annoying, and they force you to take cover to wait for your shields to recharge. This game desperately needs some kind of instant heal or heal over time or something. I'm so tired of suddenly taking damage from out of nowhere and then having no way to patch myself up other than just to wait it out behind a pillar. Now, I know a lot of people hate Destiny, but one thing it absolutely nails is it gives lots of subtle hints to the player about incoming damage, like sound, for example. You can hear when an enemy is behind you in Destiny, so you know you're about to get hit. The enemies here, they just don't make sounds. You have no idea if there is something behind you about to KO you. You are not getting all the information you need to be an effective combatant. This is made even worse by environment design. Like, so often I don't have cover to work with at all. Like, look at this mission. They want me to defend this point. What the fuck am I supposed to do here? There's no cover. I have to tank every bit of damage coming at me because there is literally nothing else that I can do. I really could not believe this when I saw it. Now, I mentioned abilities before. There really isn't much to your abilities other than just using them on cooldown. They're up so often that you never need to make real decisions with them. You just throw them out at anything because they'll be up again almost immediately. I really believe that if you doubled or tripled the number of available abilities and give them longer cooldowns and more interesting utility, you'd actually really have something here. But right now, this feels like playing Diablo 3 when you only have 2 abilities and they're basically always available. The ability system just needs a lot more depth. I'm particularly worried about the melee javelin and their viability. From what I've seen so far, melee in this game is incredibly janky with really bad animations and hit registration. I'm always just moving through my target instead of staying on them. There's also just one melee button that you're constantly spamming, so there aren't like melee combos or whatever. My attacks also just seem to stun lock enemies, so they can't do anything in response to me, leaving me free to just spam until the one time when that doesn't work and they just turn around and one-shot me. I just don't know that this has been fully thought through because most of the bosses, it just isn't safe or effective to engage them at melee range. If you've built a class that's designed to be a melee class, you need to design encounters that allow them to contribute. I'm not firm on all of this at this point. I definitely need to test it out more, but from the 6 or 7 hours that I've played with this javelin, it's definitely not working. To top all this off, there's just this constant delay in everything. Combo notifications seem delayed, enemy deaths seem delayed, using your abilities feels delayed, reloading feels delayed. It's just this feeling that you're lagged even though you aren't. It just doesn't feel snappy and responsive like it should. I said earlier that a looter needs to nail that 30-second loop. I think it's fun to fly around in Anthem. I think it's fun to use your ultimate and blow shit up. I think it's satisfying as hell when that combo sound pops and you know you've done some big damage. But I think that 30 seconds is made up of lots of pieces, big and small, and I think that Anthem is missing far too many of those pieces at this point. I've heard this argument put forward that this game wasn't really released this week. It's actually going to be released on the 22nd, which is when the day 1 patch will be deployed, and this week was just early access. Fuck off. Look at this chart. Does it say early access incomplete game? Early access broken game? No, it says early access full game. You sold this to me and others as the day I got to play Anthem. It's launched. If you're going to make it available to paying customers then that should be when your day 1 patch arrives. And on the matter of the day 1 patch, can I just say, anyone that thinks that this patch is going to fix the game, you are lying to yourself and others. Bioware has had 6 years to get this game ready. This game is so far from complete. Do you really think that an extra 7 days is the cure for what ails this game? Yes, there will be some things fixed. I've seen the day 8 patch notes. There are important fixes in there, but there is a lot of broken shit in this game, and this patch is not going to fix all of it, so stop spreading that bullshit around. This is why publishers are shipping so many broken games these days, because they can rely on an army of idiots who will not only accept it, but also defend it to the death in the comment sections and on Reddit. Because yes, right now, the game is broken as fuck. Just to paint the picture for you, on the last mission of the game, we had to restart the mission halfway through because a door wouldn't open. So we just wasted 20 minutes of our life. Then we got to the boss and I got downed, and for no apparent reason, I got sent to a loading screen where it just said cinematic in progress for 3 minutes. And then after that, I got a notification saying I'd completed the mission, despite the fact that I did not see the boss die, nor did I see the cutscene that followed it. I had to look that shit up on YouTube. Anyway, when I got back to the tower, the audio glitch kicked in, and when I finally regained control of my character, I found that the controls had stopped working and I had to Alt F4 the game. Ironically, this was the 2nd time I missed a critical cutscene because of the game bugging out, and I only found out that I missed it afterwards when in-game mission chat started talking about how someone had betrayed me, and I was like, what the fuck? He betrayed me? When did that happen? I had to go and Google that on YouTube as well. I think one of the bigger issues as well is just how long it takes for objectives to update. I mean, watch this. What the hell was going on there? This happens all the time. You're just standing there waiting for the game to register that you've done a thing so that you can then progress to the next thing. There's a whole bunch of other little stuff, like buggy cutscene animations and so much rubber banding and whatever else, but nothing compares to the destructive might of this game's loading screens. I've played Morrowind on the original Xbox. If you've played that game, you will know that load screens in that game were legendarily bad. They are way, way worse here in Anthem. They are the worst loading screens I have ever experienced in a video game. They completely destroy the experience. Want to look at your loadout? Loading screen. Want to close your loadout? Loading screen. Want to launch into a mission? Really long loading screen. Took too long to load? Another loading screen while you get teleported to your teammates. Go inside a cave? Another loading screen. Come outside of said cave? Another loading screen. Finish the mission, loading screen. Arrive at the post-reward screen, which is completely fucking useless, by the way. Why is this in the game? Anyway, close the post-reward screen, loading screen, arrive back at Fort Tarsus. Want to equip your new upgrades? I think you get the picture at this point. The load screens in this game are the absolute antithesis of the immersion that this game is trying to create. And I'd remind you that it really didn't need to be this way. If you've played the Division 2 beta, you'd see that they instanced the entire map of Washington DC, including internal spaces and your settlements and the missions and the Dark Zone. It's all there without a single load screen. You can access your inventory whenever the fuck you want. Anthem feels like it's running on technology that is at least a full generation out of date, and unlike things like new content, this stuff cannot be patched because it stems from the core game engine. You cannot fix this stuff overnight. It is deeply baked into the equation. We might see some minor relief here, but I wouldn't expect major changes to Anthem's load times until Anthem 2. The long and the short of it is that this game, after 6 years in development and just tremendous amounts of hype and marketing and everything, it was just absolutely nowhere ready to be shipped. It is buggy as hell, built on the wrong tech and feature incomplete. I love Bioware, I love looter shooters, I love Iron Man. This game was tailor-made for me. There literally could not have been a more perfect concoction of ingredients, and yet the result is bitterly disappointing. To all of those that are enjoying yourself despite the issues, I'm actually really glad about that. The purpose of my reviews is never to convince someone that they shouldn't like the thing they like. It's just to provide my own perspective on it in the hope that someone else might find that perspective useful to them. Lots of people I know enjoy Fallout 76. That's great. I'm honestly glad that they found something that they enjoy. Same here with Anthem. But let's be clear, this game has a lot of problems and we shouldn't excuse it because it's a live service game. Over the last 5 years, the definition of live service has gone from we'll add even more awesome content over time to we'll add the content we should have had at launch later on to we'll launch a broken, incomplete game now, and if you pay us enough microtransactions, we'll fix it and maybe add some content. This game is not finished. The fundamentals are not there. The game needs a massive amount of fixes before it's even been released, and you want to talk to me about new content? I don't even know what to say. This model is broken. Destiny proved it. The Division proved it. Destiny 2 proved it again. Now Anthem proves it. Companies are launching these multi-million-dollar boondoggles with the promise of forever without even being able to satisfy the here and now. It's like building the Titanic 2 in dry dock and then pushing it out to sea without testing if it even floats. And we're not even getting the Titanic. Assassin's Creed Odyssey had a map many, many times larger than this. It had a better, more functional combat model. It had plenty of abilities and build diversity. It had tons of cosmetic itemization. It had a sprawling 60-hour narrative campaign with dialogue choices that directly influenced the story. It's 2019 and Ubisoft are making really good narrative-driven games and Bioware is making shitty, repetitive, open-world garbage. If that doesn't make you worried for the future of Bioware, then nothing will. I'm sure a number of people are going to feel like I'm being really harsh because every looter shooter besides Borderlands 2 has launched in a pretty shitty state and it took a while to get good, so, why can't we apply the same logic here to Anthem? But it's like, well, we've got a lot of learning behind us, with regards to this genre. We've got a good 5 or 6 years, at least 7 years since Borderlands 2, I think, where, we can sort of say, well, what mistakes might we not want to make this time? Anthem just feels so unaware of everything that's come before it in that genre, and it's making every single one of the mistakes again, except it's making it worse. But more than that, I feel like here with Anthem, Bioware have just been so unaware of themselves. I really do understand the desire for a studio to want to try new things, you know, step into new genres, etc. And Bioware's done that in the past, even with The Old Republic. This was a very bog standard, generic MMO, but it had an absolutely brilliant story. Like, even today, go back and play it. It's such a fucking cool story. The way they wove story into the MMO genre in that game, it still just holds up superbly well today, you know? And not just cutscenes, but like actual core gameplay stuff, where they wove Bioware's magic into it. You know, it was a unique offering in the MMO space because of what Bioware brought to the table. And here with Anthem, there's just none of that. There is no awareness of Bioware's skills, no awareness of their capabilities, no awareness of their legacy. This is just a really, really average looter shooter with none of the Bioware magic. And as I said, I just feel like Bioware made the wrong game and they made it in the wrong way. And, you know, you can patch stuff, you can add new weapons and mechanics and all that sort of stuff, but you can't patch in that soul. And it really feels like Anthem is just missing soul. You know, it just feels like it has no heart. And, you know, it's the story of Anthem's like, it's this song that you can hear, you know, and some people can hear it and some people can't. It's like, well, Bioware games have always had that anthem running through them. You know, they've had that thing that people could hear, and there's just no sound here at all. And that's why I'm so disappointed with Anthem.